session, this conversation. And Linda Brown from the Bridge team will come up with us prayer.
Pray with me, please. Spirit of God, as children of light, we are bearers, seekers, and part of your revelation of Jesus to the world. Help us as we see this amazing season of Dr. Bob's ministry come to a close, and we pass on to our next season together. Help us to discern rightly and to seek your spirit always. Bless our planning and bless our communication and bless our fellowship together, we pray. Amen.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Diane Lipsit, and I have the privilege right now of being a member of the Bridge team, doing the first phases of planning for the period that Knollwood Baptist Church will experience from the time after Bob retires. We're counting that in weeks now, to the time that we call the next pastor of Knollwood Baptist Church. So we're delighted that you're joining us this morning. I am particularly delighted that the youth are walking in to join us for this conversation this morning. And my job is to take about 20, or maybe a few more than 20 minutes to give you some updates about planning that has been accomplished and is taking place for the interim period. And then all the members of the Bridge team are present to engage questions and enter into conversation with all of you in the time we have set aside for us this morning. So our plan is to look ahead at ways we have in January to honor Dr. Bob and Mrs. Bambi Setzer, and then to give an overview of the 4 phases we'll move through as a congregation during our transition to the call of a new pastor, and how we will continue healthy, vibrant, flourishing church life in that period as well. We want to introduce the model that we've settled on for interim ministry in the in-between times, which will involve work with a consultant, the call of the bringing in of an interim minister, and strong internal leadership from our congregation. They're going to go back to those 4 phases of the transition and add some details to a few key pieces, and then come back to January 5th and ask and answer the question, what can we all be doing now? It is really great to have so many people coming in the room. There are still some chairs in the rows up front. There are some chairs closer to the front at the sides. Lots of places to sit, and I'm really glad you're all here. So, it is January. Everybody say the year in unison? Are we practicing? I'm practicing. 2025. But in January, we have some key opportunities in the next 3 weeks and a couple of days to continue to express our gratitude and to celebrate a highly successful ministry of more than 13 years among us. Group gatherings, everyone come on in, there's room, I promise there are still chairs. Group gatherings will take place over the next few weeks. I'm really thrilled, for example, that Dr. Bob is going to spend the Sunday school hour with the middle school and high school youth in 2 weeks. So they get to say their own expressions of what his ministry has meant to them. Tomorrow morning, check your email at 10 a.m. You'll have nothing else to do at that moment. You'll be receiving a Knollwood email with Katie Heitz's signature. Katie has graciously served as our love offering coordinator, describing ways that you can give financially and write cards and letters of appreciation that will be collected. Our goal with the love offering is a gift generous enough to fund a celebratory trip of Bob and Bambi's choosing, with more besides. Bob's last worship service will be January 26th, and that afternoon we will gather in the fellowship hall for a party to honor him. So many people are part of these transitions. We're grateful to Trina Jackson, who is working with the team to plan refreshments and decorations for that party. We're grateful to Janet Ray, who is working with a different team to plan a really fun, lighthearted celebratory program that will start at 3 p.m. We're grateful to Spence O'Neill, who's done a lot of the pulling pieces together and communicating regularly about all of this. If your calendar is not already marked for that day, do it now. Do it now. It's the only reason you should be looking at your cell phones in minutes. As we get to February, we as a congregation will move through 4 phases. We are already, and have been since October, in a time of preparation. And in some ways, that preparation will continue in February. After February, we will enter into a period of a congregational self-study, dialogue and reflection together on Knollwood's past, Knollwood's present, and Knollwood's future. That process will lead to a congregational profile and a pastor profile, both of which documents will inform the pastor search committee as they begin the formal search for Knollwood's next pastor, culminating in the call of a new pastor and the support that we will all provide for that person who begins at Knollwood. So let me tell you more about those phases, but also notice that this is a period of change, but also a period of continuity. We're not somehow pausing being Knollwood until we get a new pastor. We are continuing to be the healthy, thriving, flourishing congregation that we now are. And in fact, in a time of transition, there are typically discoveries of new capacities and sometimes even new directions in a healthy congregation. So Knollwood will continue its tradition of being welcoming and nurturing. It will continue to offer a spiritual home to any who want to walk in the way of Jesus. This should sound like familiar language, right? Continue to embody faith in an integrated way. This really is a time not to watch things waning, but to watch as ministry deepens, mission expands, and community grows. So, how do we put a structure of leadership and ministry in place to allow both for change and for continuity and growth? The ministry model that Knollwood will rely on in the interim period will have 3 main pieces. We have already begun working with a consultant for the transition process, and that work will increase. We need some external expertise from an organization and from a person with a lot of experience with congregations who are experiencing change. We need more than just what we among us know. We also will be bringing to Knollwood an interim or transitional pastor who will do some of the work of congregational ministry before we call a new pastor. And we are going to benefit tremendously from the depth of internal Knollwood leadership that we have on our staff and in our congregation. So more about each of these pieces. Let me pause for a moment and say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there might have been one box on a screen like this. It might have said intentional interim minister. We might have looked for a person to help us in our process of congregational reflection and dialogue, and to do most of the work of ministry. We would still have internal Knollwood minister leadership though. But that is less and less the preferred practice. We benefited from it tremendously in the person of, sitting to my right and your left, the Reverend Roger Underwood, who served as our intentional interim minister 15, 14, and 13 years ago until Bob came. But it is less common to be able to find one person to do it all, and almost less preferred to do that model. So our model is somewhat different this time, and we hope it'll be beneficial for us as that model was for us then. So, introducing, if you have not already heard, our consultant for the transition process. Knollwood, through the Bridge team and other entities, has begun to work with an organization called the Center for Healthy Churches. They are experts in churches in transition in various ways, including between pastors. And they draw from a pretty rich interdenominational experience, primarily mainline Protestant churches. Lots of Baptists, but not just Baptists. Their executive director, Matt Cook, has agreed to be our consultant at Knollwood. And he will be doing a range of things with us, for us, empowering us, starting tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Matt will be here to coach our nominating committee on how they go about populating the pastor search committee. As we move on, Matt will help guide our congregational self-study that will involve the pastor search committee and also a second group, a transition team I'll describe in a moment. Throughout the pastor search, Matt will be training and supporting the pastor search committee. And then Center for Healthy Churches provides a service that, if any other organizations do this, we don't know about them, but it interested the Bridge team. They will vet candidates for the pastor search. Other congregations have found that that service broadens the applicant pool and streamlines the search process. So we're hoping it'll work that way for us also. We will be, and we have begun to search for, we will be bringing to Knollwood an interim minister with two priorities: a person who will provide regular preaching and leadership for our very gifted leaders already, our ministry staff and administrative staff. What we have learned in our work since October is we're unlikely to find or bring an interim minister who will assume all or even most of the functions of a pastor. So our priorities will be regular presence in preaching and worship on Sundays, and we have a very gifted staff. Give them the support and coordination that they need, and that's a second priority. We also know that person might not begin soon. Drawing an interim minister is a combination of fit, someone with a theology, an approach to leadership, pastoral gifts that are compatible with Knollwood, and a fit between calendars. So we may have a few months with other leadership models. Last time it took us 6 months till we had Roger. We're expecting 3 months, probably at most, before we have an interim minister in place. So what do we do What happens on Sunday if we don't have an interim minister? We're working on a plan, and we're kind of excited about it, for preaching and worship in the interim. And the subgroup of the Bridge team working together with Rosanna Goosey as our minister of music and worship began by identifying the rationale or the reasons for certain kinds of preaching invitations, even before we moved to the names, although moving to the names was kind of fun too. When we have guest preachers in our pulpit, those people will bring to us some variety in preaching styles, help open us up to change, and allow for some challenging and prophetic messages. That's one thing about guest preachers. They come, they preach, they leave. They can shake us up some, and that's a good thing. Our staff ministers will preach during the interim, after the interim minister comes as well. And they know us. So they will bring to us their own depth of leadership and how they know this congregation in a way guest preachers can't always do. We have a lot of ordained people in our congregation who are not on our staff. And when they take a turn in the pulpit, they'll bring the insights and the challenges and the gifts from among us. Between now and Easter, almost all of our invitations will be in category 1. We will have a lineup of some really interesting guest preachers from February through Lent, culminating in Easter. And you'll hear all their names, you'll hear all their mini bios, see some pictures before they're in the pulpit. But let's start with 2. The Sunday after Bob retires, Dr. Bill Leonard will preach for us, the founding dean of Wake Forest University Divinity School. Bill has been a great friend of and to Knollwood for more than 20 years. So he'll start us off in this interim period. And through Lent, culminating in Easter, to provide some continuity and bring other great preaching and pastoral gifts to our pulpit, we're going to be delighted to welcome the Reverend Dr. Chuck Poole, who served a variety of congregations, the last, the one from which he retired, being Northminster Baptist Church in Jackson, Mississippi. Chuck was Gloria Martin's pastor. Ask Gloria about Chuck. He is author of several really warm, engaging, inspiring books, and is currently in retirement working as a nonprofit leader. He is a social justice advocate, and we will be glad to welcome Chuck. Many other names, many other interesting people in our pulpit in the months beginning in February, but these are just 2 to let you know what's coming. One of the cornerstones of Bob Setzer's ministry has been the seriousness with which he has taken hospital visits, care for those who are unwell or unable to come to church, and how he officiates at funerals. So what do we do about that come February? Linda Brown and Mark Jensen are working hard. They've had individual meetings with all of our ministers on staff, consulted with many others in our congregation, and are putting together with the ministers a plan for spiritual and pastoral care in the interim. But to all of us in this room, let us invite all of us into a period of deepened commitment to mutual care as we move into this interim period. We have a lot of lay leadership bodies and a lot of small group configurations where we look out for each other. Let's do even better, watching for those who aren't present, watching for those facing periods of vulnerability, and showing up for each other. As you look at the job titles on this screen, think of the names that go with them. Think of the people who embody these roles, and take a moment to be deeply grateful for the giftedness of our continuing ministers. And youth, raise your hands, be excited, minister to youth and families, come 1 week, will not be a placeholder, right? We have a rich and gifted staff who will help us in the months ahead and lead us in the months ahead, including an exceptionally gifted professional staff of administrative leaders in our church office. John Bomey and I have had the privilege of individual meetings with all of our ministry staff, and most so far, we have 2 conversations to go, of our administrative staff to hear more about how they collaborate with each other, how they work together, and to imagine a process of staff support, coordination, and leadership to give them the kind of support they need and deserve to richly use their gifts for us in the interim period. So again, we are in already and will continue to be in a period of preparation, followed by a time for a congregational self-study that will lead to the pastor search and the call and support of our new pastor. A few more details, if you will. Our pastor search committee's roles, how we constitute the pastor search committee, is described in our church bylaws. So let me announce we're going to follow our bylaws. But the scope of the pastor search committee's work can vary from one search experience to the next. So one thing to know about the pastor search committee this time is that this group, unlike last time, will also be involved in all 4 phases of the transition. The pastor search committee, that is, will also be part of the self-study, of the congregational dialogue and reflection, though they'll have some help with that work. There are 12 members, according to our bylaws, of the pastor search committee. 4 of them serve in virtue of the offices they currently, or that they hold at the time that the search committee is constituted. So the chair of our Deacon Executive Committee, Spence O'Neill, the chair of our Personnel Committee, John Bowie, the chair of our Finance Committee, Charles Maynor, and the chair of our Mission Allocation and Affiliation Committee, Clyde Cash, will all be invited to serve in virtue of the offices they hold on the pastor search committee. The nominating committee then is charged with the responsibility to identify 8 other members at large who are willing to serve, and the search committee will choose its own chair and vice chair, or co-chairs. Okay, take a breath. We are hoping to constitute the pastor search committee in the month of January. So we have a kind of ambitious goal of voting as soon as February 2nd, the first Sunday in February, to elect a pastor search committee. That puts a lot of pressure on our nominating committee to use discernment, to do proper deliberation, to issue invitations, to get responses in a short enough time that a slate can be announced to the congregation in advance of a February 2nd vote. That's fast. In a moment, I'm going to explain why we're hopeful we could do it that fast. But just let me say right now, should you in this room receive a call from someone on the nominating committee inviting you to consider serving on the pastor search committee, you need to take time to seek the Lord. You need discernment, deliberation, care about what will be a major commitment in the coming year. Don't take too much time. Got it? We need time efficient listening to the Spirit. And I really do mean both. All right? I really do mean both. If possible, if February 2nd doesn't work, you know what? We're all going to be together a week or two later. We can make this happen. But let me explain a little more about the process and why we're aiming for so fast a goal. We will also be selecting a transition study team, not described in our bylaws, therefore it falls to the Deacon Executive Committee to constitute other authorized bodies for the church. And the transition study team will partner with the Pastor Search Committee for phases 1 and 2, which everyone has memorized now. Phase 1 is preparation, phase 2 is self-study, thank you. All right, so we're thinking approximately 6 people who will do the heavy lifting for the self-study, accompanied by the Pastor Search Committee. The Deacon Executive Committee will appoint them, and they'll be recommended by the Bridge team after the slate for the Pastor Search Committee comes together. So the TST, and we love acronyms, right? Okay, so here we go. Ready for some high-speed acronyms. TST plus PSC will do orientation together with Matt Cook. And then during the self-study period, the transition study team will take the lead, but the Pastor Search Committee will be consistently involved. Together, they will write a congregational profile. Then the TST concludes its work, and I suggest has a party. And then the Pastor Search Committee can't have a party yet, because their heavy lifting continues. And as they move into writing the next pastor profile and enter into the search and call. So why that February 2nd hurry? But first, wait, I forgot. The reason for this, okay, one slide before I get to the reason for the hurry. Why are we proposing this paired model? Because it will lighten the initial workload of what's expected of the Pastor Search Committee. Because it will ensure continuity in what is learned from and about the congregation through the self-study. It will genuinely inform the Pastor Search Committee if they're involved from the beginning. Because it makes room for distinct gifts and skills. We have among us people who are really good at group facilitation, at fostering dialogue, at analyzing quantitative and qualitative data. Those are all really key skills for the self-study that may be less relevant to a pastor search. So we bring in more gifts and skills, and we have ways to enhance congregational representation. We think Knollwood is in a healthy place. We think there is a lot of energy and that we benefit from the legacy of 13 years of a successful pastoral ministry. So we think this self-study can be energetically and meaningfully entered into in a relatively short span of time. So the self-study is anchored by 3 large congregational meetings. And we've already set tentative dates for those meetings. You're going to get a piece of paper at the end of the meeting with the dates on them. That March 2nd, we would gather to talk about Knollwood's past, April 6th, the present, April 27th, the future. Why these dates? I mean, notice when the public school spring break is this year, when Lent falls, when Easter happens, when Mother's Day is, when we start to go our separate ways for the summer. We would like to be able to do this work together, meaningful, reflective, dialogical work together before the summer. And so this is a timetable that would allow that to happen with some lovely momentum that then authorizes the Pastor Search Committee to start its work, all supported by our consultant from the Center for Healthy Churches. So how long are we talking? Last time we did a pastor search, it was 6 months till Roger Underwood came for us. And then we spent many months on our transition study. And they were meaningful worthwhile months and efforts that were right for Knollwood at that time. This time we're aiming for a self-study in 4 months, starting in February. How long will a pastor search take? Read it with me. As long as it takes to find the right person that God is preparing even now to lead this congregation. We do think support from the Center for Healthy Churches will streamline some stages of this transition. It remains true that less than 9 months would be odd. So I'll just leave it there. Because the real answer is it takes as long as it takes to do this work among us. But let's come back now to January 5th, 2025. What can we be doing now? Pray for Bob and Bambi, our ministers, our leaders, and our administrative staff. Express gratitude. In a couple of directions in particular, Bob and Bambi, but there's lots of gratitude to be expressed in these days of anticipating change. Your spiritual duty is to read your email. Stay informed and involved by reading KBC's emails, by participating in the congregational meetings. Matt Cook will be here at Knollwood, and members of the Nominated Leadership Development Committee will meet Matt tomorrow. But everyone can meet Matt when he's here for our first congregational meeting, and he will preach for us, tentatively scheduled for March 2nd. Pray for our congregation and leaders. In February, our theme in worship will become Listen for the Spirit, as we worship, plan, and live as disciples of Jesus. And start those practices of mutual care. Reach out by phone or mail to folks who are unable to come to church or who you've missed seeing lately. Let's be church for one another as we enter into this period. I would like to ask for 60 seconds for you to turn to the person next to you. Look the other way and make it a group of 3 if there's a risk of somebody being left out. And in 60 seconds, share with somebody next to you what's on your mind, having heard this overview. Something you've learned, something you wonder, something you're thinking about. 60 seconds, and then we'd like to have a time of questions and conversation with the Bridge team.
Do we have a second microphone? I forgot to ask when the camera is.
Thank you so much. Now, you may, I think by talking to 1 or 2 people, you may have helped seed the conversation for the next 20 minutes. We would like to invite questions or comments. We're actually not inviting speeches. I'm the only one who got to make a speech today, sorry. But we do have all the members of the bridge team. Linda is here with a microphone to take to you if you are willing to ask a question or make a comment. And then all of the members of the bridge team are here to answer and respond.
So those of us talking here wanted to first say how amazed and grateful we are for the thoroughness of this. And also, really fascinated by the range of opportunities for everybody to be involved. So I think that's our big takeaway, to roll up our sleeves and jump in.
Thank you, Dean.
You could probably hear me without this. I guess the first question came to my mind is, we're jumping on this after Bob leaves. Is there anything in the bylaws why we didn't start this process in October or November when he announced it?
Well, it's a great question, and the answer is we actually did, quietly, for some period of time. So that's the short answer. Is this has been in the works, and a lot of this Diane just walked you through has happened because there was a period of time with a small group, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and whereas Linda's 6, we particularly have been on this journey.
The only thing I would add is it's tempting for us to actually get ahead of ourselves. For a healthy transition, we came to the conviction that our first task is to celebrate what has been really deep and wide and rich for 13 years.
I'm wondering what it means to streamline the self-study process. I know that it took longer the last time we did it, but those times were valuable. So I'm in particular wondering whether we're going to be surveying the entire congregation again, as opposed to just 3 conversations.
Yeah, we're as Knollwood are not streamlining a process recommended by others. We are opting for the process that the Center for Healthy Churches uses, which is with its 3 major conversations, more streamlined than the 4 or 5 pillars approach that we used last time. And I at least worried that it would be too thin a process. But especially, but in each of the conversations, there's really substantial work to be done to gain more mutual understanding. And especially the second congregational conversation, which focuses on the present, will be informed by a wide array of data about our congregation and about where we are in the world, geographically, socially. And so they are, so it is a faster process, but I don't think it's a shallow process from what we can tell going into it.
Our table accidentally invented a word because it was loud and I can't always hear right. But when we were talking, someone said that this seems interesting, but I heard interstressing. And I think that the timeline, especially between now and February 2nd, seems interstressing. But I also think it's a tremendous opportunity for us. I think it's really cool that we are going to, together as a church, spend time really thinking about who we are and what this community will bring to our future pastor, as well as what they might bring to us. And I hope that we all find that less stressing and more interesting, because I think it's a huge opportunity.
Interesting is such a great word, it needs a response. Response.
Oh, we're going to copyright that word. Thank you, Marissa.
I think the stress is mostly here. And, but I feel confident that you'll heed Diane's invitation if you get a call to take it seriously and respond.
You can even be thinking now about what you would do. You got something. And be thinking of ideas for pastor search committee when the nominating committee asks for those.
And read your emails.
So hopefully we will have a new youth minister starting. Could you speak more to the support for helping this person, for helping Naomi adjust, assuming that we are successful in calling her?
She's on her own.
No, she has Corinne. Corinne's on her
She chose.
committee.
Well, I think we're next week you're going to find out how blessed we are going to be with this potentially new addition. Clearly, we have a sterling staff that's going to wrap their arms around her. The bridge team is positioned to also work with the staff as we work with her to get her feet on the ground. She is going to be a jewel, for us, and I think there's going to be significant support to get her working with the youth, get her working with the families, and just a nice path that is planned for her to get to work.
We also trust that the chair of that search committee, who was that? Oh yeah, it was Corinne. The chair of that search committee and that search committee will not go away when she gets here and stay in close contact.
I would just add that I thought it was interesting that she seems excited about coming on board during the transition period. And didn't seem intimidated or threatened by it at all, so.
I'd like to exercise my prerogative as a youth Sunday school teacher and ask a middle school or high school student, do you have a question or a comment in this gathering? They love being put on the spot. Someone. Be thinking while someone else asks a question, okay? We're coming back to you. Other questions or comments from anyone of any age?
This may be a little dumb, but I've not been a part of a congregation in a long time. But knowing this congregation, how close and how, just how great this church is, and let's just give you some kudos for that. Do you, when the pastor search committee goes out, do you get applicants, or you go out looking for the minister? Because this is going to be a very desirable pastor for anybody that I can think of fits this mold. So I just wondered how that was accomplished.
I think it's a great question. I think it's all of the above. I think that there will be those, perhaps there already have been, that have said, consider me kind of thing. But what we were intrigued with Center for Healthy Churches' approach is that once that pastor profile is done, then that allows them to assist the pastor search committee in going and selecting those folks. Versus having sat on the pastor search committee 15 years ago, all of that legwork, if you will, being done by the pastor search committee itself. So the vetting that CHC will do is not them telling us, here's who we think your pastor should be is working with the pastor search committee and that process and some of that work for them. Hopefully that answers your question.
I'm just interested, how many of us here, show of hands, were not here the last time Knollwood called a pastor, or newer than that? Okay. So keep that in mind, whether you're new or whether you've been here a long time, how many of us in this congregation that are active members now were not part of the process the last time. This is our first time going through it together.
Baptist life is a curious and wonderful thing. And practically, one of the ways this often happens is somebody nominates. So somebody sends us a letter and says, we'd like to nominate. Now, they've already talked to the person they're nominating and say, would you be interested and would you like for me to nominate? So those will start coming in, and CHC will help us, guided by the profile that we put together after these months of hard work, sift through that.
And I'll add that the Center for Healthy Churches knows us already so well, and they know that it is a desirable place to serve for a particular kind of minister. So they know our history, they know that we've already gone through some other times of challenges, and so they know this process can seem streamlined, but it's because they don't expect any huge red flags to come up between congregational meetings that make us stop and have to do some internal talking. So what you said was true, it is a desirable ministry place, and we are thriving. So they were very complimentary. They just knew our congregation really well, and that was one of the reasons that we wanted them to work with us.
This is kind of a question and a comment. I'm aware of things such as ongoing Sunday school classes, but also the women's retreat that's coming up. Those are great opportunities for additional input into the self-study. And I wonder if there is any kind of a plan for how to capture those kinds of comments. Last time we had a survey. I'm not necessarily talking about a survey, but maybe even there would be some material that could be given to classes, to groups that are meeting, to the retreat, to feed additional comments about ourselves in the self-study.
We'll put that in the hopper, the committee.
Good idea.
I just want to say, I have been a member here 10 years, and I'm impressed with the congregation. My experience in Charlotte, where I grew up in a similar Baptist church, was I was on a search committee, and at that time, our church was in disarray. We had issues with part of the minister, and we then called an intentional interim who worked and saved our church. This church is not in trouble. This church is not a church that is in need of someone to come in and heal us and pastor us. We are a strong congregation that I think the plan going forward, I asked some questions earlier about why we're just doing an interim, and I think that is absolutely what this church needs, and it expedites the process, and I understand it. But this congregation is healthy, and we will go forward, and we will bring a person in here, I think, that will fill some big shoes.
I also get nervous about too much self-praise. So I'm also going to say, we have our stuff. No one has our stuff. And I think this process of reflection and dialogue is robust enough for some of those things to be identified. I believe we're healthy. There are all kinds of signs we're growing. But we have questions, hard questions. Don't expect 3 congregational meetings where you go away with sore shoulders because you've just been patting yourself on the back.
I think we're probably a strong congregation because we have a lot of independent thinkers, and that's very good. One of the questions that I have is whether or not CHC, Center for Healthy Churches, is the same consultant group that we did before.
It is not. It didn't exist when we did this before. There are two primary organizations that do this. There are more than that, but two primary. And as we went through the assessment of both, last time, 15 years ago, we used the Center for Congregational Health here locally, and in fact used their executive director initially in some of the discussions for us. But Center for Health Churches has been in existence for 10 plus years, probably closer to 15. And we just felt that they were the better fit for us as we move this term at this time.
And that was part of what we've been doing since October.
Are there common challenges or difficulties that can arise historically in processes like this? And what can we as a congregation do to help prevent those, or if we see them arise?
My response is, we have to balance our anxiety about what's going to happen with our curiosity about openness to change. So that I think the tension between continuity and change is what we have to manage. We've become aware, you saw how many hands went up, that this is an opportunity for us to get to know our own congregation. So I would encourage and challenge you to be open to the surprises that will come, that this is a chance for us to engage and hear one another in new ways. I don't know if I'm answering your question, Josh. Talk back to me about that.
So anxiety is a challenge.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will say that another area that makes the bridge team pause is that when the nominating committee comes up with a slate, and there are individuals that, for various reasons, are not wanting to participate or has other issues associated at that time, putting in the time. And so I think that is a challenge, that if that happens, then the timetable that's been expressed could be elongated.
Will there be any youth representation in this process?
I would assume so. Part of that will be with what the nominated leadership development committee comes up with, and the other part of that is as Diane pointed out, those folks that will be on the transition study team to oversee the self-study process should certainly incorporate full representation of all demographics of the church. So that would be the intent. So your youth back there, whoever's asked, be prepared to say yes, please.
And also the 3 congregational meetings, everybody that comes to those has input, has a chance, and the onus is on you to speak up and say, what do you think is our current situation? What do you see in our future, all of our futures together? So those congregational meetings are really important.
My first thought in response to that question was hopefully our called youth minister will be part of this process, and it made me think of a bigger question in terms of the staff that we do have. What will be their role in terms of involvement in calling a new pastor for our church?
Cliff tells me to answer. I do, Cliff says, yeah, so our staff ministers and our administrative staff are part of the source of our confidence that we will continue to flourish. And their roles are going to deepen and stretch in ways that we want to keep manageable and voluntary for them, but in ways that could be ministry enhancing for them and therefore for us. In the self-study itself, the ministry staff won't sit at tables with the congregation. They'll have their own separate conversation. That's Center for Healthy Churches practice, and we'll follow their expert guidance in that, so that how the ministers contribute their perspective, their wisdom, their knowledge of the congregation is its own information flow that isn't put into and therefore influencing how the congregation might respond. Does that kind of answer?
And I also think the consultant is going to be talking with the staff ministers directly, getting their input on the congregational profile. And that's another way, but there's
Yes.
another level of getting their input.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. That's a really important piece.
We've talked about the need for people to prayerfully consider whether or not to be on the search committee. We got the nominating committee who needs to populate that committee. Mark and I were on the search committee probably 25 years ago, where we used what I would say the old model of sneaking into churches and stealthily sitting there and hearing the minister, because we didn't have online worship. And so I'm curious about what do we think, how we think that search process might be different now than it was even 15 years ago, as far as the responsibilities of the search committee members when they might be considering that.
I think the honest answer to that is we'll find out when we get our training or when the pastor search committee gets their training. But certainly it will be as hands-on as it needs to be and easier to do than it was 15 years ago. There were a lot of trips to make in Georgia.
We have time for possibly one more comment or question.
This is more of a comment than a question. Being one of the people who've only been here a short time, I would just suggest that the week that we look back, that someone have, if nothing else, bullet points or comments to make on where this church has been, so that we can all walk into the present knowing what our past is. I've got a great history, sorry.
Yeah. I appreciate that. What I know so far of the description of that first congregational meeting is it looks like a blend of let someone tell the long arc of Knollwood's history, and then let's also respect every single person's story, whether their history with Knollwood is 8 months or 20 years, is part of our history. So a short experience of Knollwood doesn't mean you don't have some history here to tell and to share through your stories. I'm going to ask Mark Jensen if he will close this part of our conversation in prayer. And as I do, Catherine's reminding me to let you all know that next Sunday morning during the Sunday school hour, you have the option again to gather in here to meet the candidate for our Minister to Youth and Families ministry position before we have a call church in conference and a vote on that call in worship next Sunday.
Before and as we pray on behalf of the Bridge team, let me thank you for the energy that I sense in the room and the readiness to engage this kind of celebration and change. Now, let's pray. Loving God, in and through whom we live and have our being, we give thanks for the ways your Spirit has sustained, led, and accompanied the people of Knollwood. Help us now to listen to ourselves, to one another, to the whispers of your Spirit. Grant us wisdom, grant us courage, grant us imagination, grant us patience, grant us curiosity, grant us kindness, grant us humor. We ask these things through Jesus Christ our Lord.